All right, everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the alleged death of Paul McCartney, the dark secret hidden by Mr. Rogers, sinister phone calls to babysitters, and what happens when you toy with the gates of hell by spinning an album backwards.
So, Jeff, a couple episodes back, we were talking about Saturday Night Live and the upcoming anniversary. We were talking about what we liked about, all the stuff that we had watched as kids. And there was a show, a specific anniversary show coming up that I watched. And it was really long and a little bit too long. Had some funny stuff, had some great old stuff, musical guests. And Paul McCartney was one of the musical guests and wrapped up the show. He sounded pretty good. And Paul McCartney's in his 80s. Did a bit of a medley of, Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight and wrapped up with the end. So, and it was good. But one thing that got me thinking, again, as we're watching, going, yeah, Paul McCartney looks pretty good. But I remember a time, and this was years ago, this was probably when Saturday Night Live had just come out or thereabouts. My friends and I were convinced that Paul McCartney was dead because we had been provided with enough, I don't want to say evidence, but enough inference or enough urban legend to question his very existence and the fact that he was dead and been replaced by a lookalike. And the crazy thing about that is I don't even know how we started picking up on that information, because it's not like we had crazy rumors on the internet. I mean, not like we had Reddit. It's not like we had, any social media that would have started this lie, basically, because he looks to be alive. And but it really brought me back to that whole rabbit hole of how do we find out whether or not Paul McCartney is alive?
Super interesting that you would bring that up. That was maybe one of the first conspiracies I ever can remember collecting in my very open-minded, some might even say gullible brain. Because you know me, Chris, and we've mentioned this before. Man, do I love the conspiracies, right? I do love me a conspiracy. Of course, again, and I've said this before, disclaimer for my conspiracies. I think my conspiracies are kind of heartfelt, fun-loving, nobody gets hurt kind of conspiracies, right? Like, what did happen on the moon? Or is there really a Bigfoot? What's up with that Loch Ness monster? Hey, are aliens real?
Benign conspiracies.
These are kind of like kindergarten versions of I would say my conspiracies are conspiracies 101. If there was a book that said, so you want to be a conspiracy theorist, you would start with mine, right? And I'm actually, again, we've said this before, embarrassed to even be in this world now with other people who claim to be conspiracy theorists. And they really, Chris, if this is even possible, have given conspiracy theoryism, that's a word, theoryism, a bad name. But I digress. Let me go back. When I was in 5th grade, there was this amazing kid named Frank. Now, Frank was his own person, dude. He did not give in to trends. He did not give in to peer pressure. He wore, throughout all of grade school, a Gilligan hat. A Gilligan hat. Now, that's making a statement, right? And for those that may be wondering what I'm saying here, it's a floppy hat that you would wear at the beach, or if you were on the SS Minnow for a 3-hour tour.
Little buddy.
My point is, Frank was the original creative, super clever, free spirit that could give a F what anyone thought of him. And because of that, highly intelligent, right? He had access to knowledge and information that most of us just didn't even give an F about, So one day he came in for show and tell, and he brought in 10 or so Beatles albums. And we'd all heard of the Beatles, but he laid out the Paul is dead conspiracy as told to him by his older brother in such riveting detail that we all just sat there stunned. Even the popular kids were like, I'm sorry, what now? Right? And so he would go album by album. And of course, Abbey Road, They're walking across the street, and as we can see, John Lennon represents Jesus because, he's all in white. And George Harrison is the grave digger, right? Because he's got the black thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Paul is dead. How do we know that? Because he's the only one with bare feet.
Oh, man, you're nailing it. Keep going.
And then I'm trying to think who Ringo was in this conspiracy.
Ringo is the Undertaker. He's wearing like a nice dark suit. Yes.
The Undertaker, thank you. And here was the thing. I'm going, well, even as a kid, believe it or not, I know people who know me will be shocked. I was a little skeptical. I know, hard to believe. I was skeptical. But then he showed the Volkswagen Bug parked on the street in the background of that famous photo. And it says on the license plate, 25.
No, 28.
Well, now we have, Chris, I was going to say a nice pull contest, and I was going to call it a pull-off. But let's not call it a pull-off. That would not be good.
I'd do that off camera.
Let's come up with a different name.
Yes.
I can't believe we've been doing the show this long. We almost are at our 50th episode, and we've never come up with a name for a I think I'm right and you think you're right trivia contest. Pull-off is probably the wrong thing to say. But I think it was 25 if. You think it's 28 if. We will check that, guys. But the whole point is, this is how old he would have been if he hadn't died. And then I thought, hold on a second. That is pretty damning evidence in my brain, right? Holy crap. So then he starts showing us.
What more do you need?
What more do you need, right? And of course, as a kid, that's critical thinking, right? That is the definition of being a critical thinker, is all you need is one extra tiny piece. Okay, well, case closed.
This guy at school named Frank.
But it didn't stop. He just kept going and going and going. And by the time he's done, you're like, holy shit. Paul died, and they definitely replaced him with somebody different. And then at the end of the day, you never ask questions like, why? What? What was the, huh? You don't ask those questions. You just go, well, it must be true.
Did anybody go, oh no, the guy from Wings is dead? Right? Because at that point, that's where it was Paul McCartney and Wings.
Yeah.
You came home, you were convinced, and you probably told your parents, and they probably scoffed at you or whatever. But yeah, I don't know how we even, start pulling on that thread. I think there may have been influence from an older sibling of some sort. But it was, first of all, there was like, well, yeah, because there were the lyrics in now I'm blanking on the song, A Day in the Life. Right? I read the news today, oh boy, about a lucky man who made the grave. And it talks about this. He blew his mind out in a car. It's like, Paul died in a car accident. Okay. They'd seen his face before.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. And so it was like, we know this is a famous person who spilled out into the street. So that's probably counter argument number one.
Chris, you're building a very sound case. I'll tell you that right now. I'm listening.
I'm going to pull the mask off Scooby-Doo style later, and I'm going to be revealed to be Frank from your old class. But basically, first of all, let's say you witness this accident. The Beatles were enormously famous at the time. But it's just like, I don't know, man, is that our city councilman? Who is that? No, it's Paul freaking McCartney. Okay. He hadn't noticed that the lights had changed. The whole thing was like he runs a light and dies.
By the way, Chris, I have to pause you for 1 second. You just created the funniest effing visual in my head. You said a guy died in a car accident. People didn't walk up and say, oh, it's the guy from the city council. Dude, that is such a great visual because you can totally imagine what would happen, right? There's a car accident. Mm-hmm. People think they recognize him. The crowd rushes up. Have they seen his face before? And then they go, oh, no, that's just that crazy dude from all those city council meetings. And it just completely disperses the crowd and no one gives an F. It's just, I don't know why, but for some reason your visual was absolutely effing hilarious. Sorry, continue, sir.
No. And hey, that's great songwriting. Okay. And so then they got into, there was other bits and pieces of it that was I Am the Walrus, which, and again, I remember that song. It was one of the, the Beatles had some songs that were great and had almost operatic in their presentation. And then you had, Yellow Submarine and When I'm 64. They were almost like, well, you were just kind of in a goopy mood or you were really high at the time when you wrote this.
Or both.
So I never, or both. And again, I don't know how we even prompted to do this. We got one of the albums, and I think it may have been A Day in the Life, or, listened to the song on A Day in the Life, and we put it on the turntable, and we tried to get it up to 33 and a third, right? And we used a pencil, right? And I'm sure we were screwing up, probably not a good thing for the turntable. And I'm sure that's why my dad wondered at some point why his turntable was all screwed up. But we're playing it, we're kind of going, counterclockwise, and to get it up, and we were using the eraser on the pencil, so we're not damaging the record. And then we heard it starts getting up, it starts making these weird sounds. And then we were 100% convinced. We heard it say, "Turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man." And we were, I swear to God, Jeff, I don't think I could sleep that night. I was so freaked out by what we thought we had just heard. And we were convinced that Paul McCartney was dead. And when you go back, and maybe, again, this is the heart of conspiracy theories, you would have to ask yourself, why? If, let's just say he was dead, and, they'd seen his face before, he was dead, they managed to cover it up, replace him with not only a look-alike, but like a sound-alike, and a guy who could be a musician and everything. And Paul McCartney and John Lennon, they were the driving force of the Beatles, right? So they managed to just replace him just like that. But at the same time, they started to F with people and put clues in the album cover art and in the hey, let's record this backwards in the studio with George Martin. I mean, all these kind of, it's like, what? Why? But we bought it. I think maybe because it was so wild, we thought it was cool. And we were convinced it has to be true, because this is the coolest thing ever.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head with conspiracy theories, because it starts with wanting to believe something, and then it somehow makes you feel special because you now have this secret knowledge, right? And that makes you unique. And I don't care if you don't believe it. I know the truth because ... I've done all the research. We hear that all the time, right? But the research is, well, come on, the license plate. I mean, how could it, look at this, look at that.
The whole Abbey Road cover is one giant clue.
Once you've convinced yourself, no one's going to talk you out of it, dude. You actually have an emotional investment. It's now part of your identity. And so, yeah, you're hooked. But I did the exact same thing as you. I took, it was actually the White Album, and the song is Revolution Number 9. And if you play the song the correct way, there's a section that goes, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9. Very scary.
Mm-hmm.
And if you play it backwards, which again, this meant that the needle had to be down so that the speakers were activated, but now you're going to use your actual hands, and you're going to roll it. You're going to roll the turntable the opposite way. And Chris, I had the exact same experience. I was doing this unwittingly by myself in my room with the lights out.
Or a pencil.
And I wasn't trying to creep myself out, but it did the same thing when I heard it. And it sounded just like, what it up, turn me on, dead men. Turn me on, dead men. Turn me on, dead men. Dude, to say that it freaked me out is an understatement. Of course, I turned the lights on. I'm like, oh my God, right? And by the way, as I put 2 and 2 together, pretty sure that was the same night that I later went downstairs and at 10 o'clock at night when my parents were gone, accidentally stumbled onto the movie Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. I don't need to go into that again. We've already gone over it, but to go from Turn Me On Dead Man to tiny evil demons that live in a hell dimension in your basement that drag a woman out of her bed downstairs into the basement into a hell dimension, Chris, that is not a good night for a very impressionable kid, right? That's too open-minded. In fact, I can look back on that now, Chris, and see that may have caused permanent psychological damage in some ways.
I don't even know where to begin. I don't know why you did that yourself.
I've been asked that question so many times, Chris, in different contexts, but yeah, I hear you.
Right. So I think that in itself, I had a couple friends who who with me at the time when we did that, because I don't think I was going to. I was afraid of what I was going to hear, or maybe I think that would have been a good movie plot at the time, when these kids start playing the stuff backwards and then they somehow morph into demons or something like that.
Yeah, that is a good idea, actually.
But then again, when you start to dissect it, what does that even mean? First of all, turn me on, dead man? Are we getting into necrophilia? Or is it a reference to, we've replaced Paul, but nobody knows that, but he's a dead man and we're still... So I don't even know what that means, but I heard it and I was convinced that these, 12-year-olds in San Carlos in San Diego, California had somehow cracked this amazing case.
Of course. Of course. Chris, we didn't have Snopes back then. You can't just go debunk something, right? We were no less superstitious in the 70s and 80s than we are today. It's the same human psyche. And if anything, today you could argue was worse. You could argue it was the same. But not having any sort of way to verify or not verify things, to make it so hard back then to really get the data that you need to have an objective opinion, it was just much easier, as you know, right? Just like watching only 4 channels, so much easier to just believe the fun thing, which is aliens are real, there is a Loch Ness Monster, the lost city of Atlantis, and the Bermuda Triangle, and Paul is dead. Yay! Anyway, sorry, I think I just summed up my entire youth there.
Or your adulthood.
Yeah, it's right. Touché.
And again, and we've touched on this in the past, is like somehow, and you just mentioned, it's like there was no Snopes to debunk it, but there was no Reddit, or there was no any sort of weird chat room or social media to even start it.
The cafeteria was the chat room.
And maybe Frank's parents, bought into it, but it came from somewhere. Just like, at the time, one of the shows that we were watching, after school, one of our favorites, obviously Leave It to Beaver, right? And in the crazy antics of Theodore Beaver Cleaver, right? And all the problems, all the problems he caused, and all the things he got, all the trouble he got into. I never quite did they ever explain why his nickname was Beaver and why it would go Beaver Cleaver? I don't know.
So weird. I mean, I can only imagine now that you just mentioned it, that because his last name was Cleaver, kids thought it would be funny to call him Beaver. Of course, even though later on we all made the sexual connotation joke, and Chris, you know this one, right? What is the dirtiest thing that was ever said on network television?
And he was Ward. I think you were a little hard on the Beaver last night.
Thank you, Chris. Well done, sir. Well done. That was not rehearsed, everybody. Chris really did remember that.
Right. Yes. But then also because they called him Beav or somehow, but then he had this other personality where he was the Beaver. You know what I mean? It's like, wow.
That's right. That's a good point, Chris. Why was he Beav and then sometimes the Beaver? Very interesting.
That's like one of those guys that like a rapper would call him, somebody with this larger than life. Hey man, I'm the Beaver.
Except Beaver is spelled phonetically and somehow the number 3 is in the middle of it. We don't know how. Okay.
Exactly. Chance the Beaver, or Theodore the Beaver. But anyway, so the Beaver, but Jerry Mathers, right? And Jerry Mathers as the Beaver. Okay, he was the star of the show. Forget about, Larry Mondello, and forget, Eddie Haskell kind of came in and out.
Now you're just showing off. Well done.
Right. Okay, but Eddie Haskell, I always kind of related to Eddie Haskell because he was pretty much a dick and he just said ridiculous shit. It's like, hey, I kind of like that guy's,
Oh yeah, he's the best part of the whole show.
Right. I like his style, his savoir-faire. Anyway.
He's definitely the kind of guy that would be selling timeshares or getting into real estate later on, that personality.
Oh my God. I'm going to have to off air. I think I know who Eddie Haskell is because I think he sells he sells real estate, and he bothers me on Facebook, even though I never talked to him in high school.
We've all met Eddie Haskell.
By the time we were watching these shows, they were, I don't know, 20 years old or close to 20 years, went off in the 60s and we're watching in the late 70s, early 80s. But one of the things that people had said, and there was really no way to even verify this or not, because again, we didn't have the access, that Jerry Mathers, a.k.a. the Beaver, a.k.a. Beav, was dead. And not only was he dead, he had died in Vietnam, which, again, was one of those things that was like, at the time, Vietnam, was still this sort of ongoing national tragedy and all the things that you would hear about it.
Yeah.
But he was dead and he died in Vietnam. And so that sort of made, watching that show, it was just like, wow, I love the Beav. He's hilarious.
Well, Chris, we all love the Beav. Let's get that straight.
Right. Yeah, we love the Beaver.
I mean, that's the greatest thing about any urban legend. And it goes to this day. What you got to do to create the perfect urban legend is you've got to create something that's going to evoke some kind of an immediate reaction. I know that thing or person that you're talking about. I have my own impression of that person or thing, And now you've added this giant left turn twist that, as crazy as it sounds, is also somehow believable in my brain. And if you can come up with the perfect combination of that as the master puppeteer or, creator again of these urban legends, you've done your job. So you take Beaver, super wholesome. Everyone remembers him. Again, guys, remember, there's only 4 or 5 channels you can even watch, and the reruns are relentless as we are kids in the 70s. And then you take the Vietnam War, which is synonymous with tragedy and heartache. And of course, you can believe it, right? Oh, no, not the Beaver. Oh, Vietnam. No. Right? Yeah. And there's so many of those, right, Chris? And yes, of course, I heard that one. I don't know when it was that I finally realized Jerry Mathers was still alive. It's not like he could go on his feed.
On his podcast.
And yeah, go on his podcast or announce on Instagram, hey, guys, that was just, I'm okay. I'm still alive. So I'm trying to think of any other ones that were around back then.
Well, but here's the thing. So eventually, and I think at the time this may have been because I think maybe Renaissance is too strong a word.
It usually is, Chris. That's a powerful word.
But there was sort of a revival, sort of a Renaissance of Leave It to Beaver. And I think, but this time we were maybe in high school, and I think there was a sort of a reboot, a reunion show.
Okay.
And I remember very explicitly, and maybe it wasn't just specifically around Leave It to Beaver. It's Phil Donahue, which we don't talk about enough because I think Phil Donahue, man, what a cultural touchstone for some of the things that I still remember. I think Jerry Mathers was on the show with some other child stars, right? And it was like, holy shit, Jerry Mathers is not only alive, he's he's middle-aged, and he's on Phil Donahue. As Jerry Mathers himself addressed and debunked the rumors that he had died in combat.
But how did he debunk it, Chris? What was his proof?
I guess the fact that he was sitting there.
Oh, I see. Oh, you're going to pull that one on me? I already fell for the Paul thing. You're not going to just drag this.
It looked like Jerry Mathers.
It did look a lot like him. Now, he had lost a little bit of his impish looks and charm.
Yeah. He was definitely not the old Beav, but he explained it and addressed it as, no, that was not true. However, another child star from the 60s, from a beloved sitcom, from the Dick Van Dyke Show, whose name was Larry Matthews.
Okay.
Who played Richie Petrie.
Okay.
So he was Rob and Laura's kid on the Dick Van Dyke Show. Ancillary character, kind of come in and out, had a high-pitched, annoying voice.
Really just kind of a disposable character. I remember that kid only having 1 or 2 lines a season, and honestly just came across as sort of a little shit most of the time. He was just sort of a not super grateful, just kind of spoiled, would just kind of say some bullshit thing and then go in his room. You're like, Jesus, man, this is the kid you're raising? Yeah.
You never saw his room. They never
Or did you want to? Who cares about that kid?
So apparently Larry Matthews was the one who died. So Larry Matthews had died. And Larry Matthews, Jerry Mathers, you can see the disconnect. Same sort of era. Although, like we just said, Richie Petrie and, Beaver Cleaver, stratospheres apart. But so that was where was essentially an urban legend came from that was debunked by the Beaver himself.
Chris, when you say stratospheres apart, you're not kidding. Because again, like I said, you have to start with someone who is either well-known or beloved. And the more they're well-known or the more that they play a part in your imagination, the stronger the reaction is going to be to the conspiracy. So Jerry Mathers died. Oh, no. Oh, my God, that's horrible. Right? What's the kid's name again? Sorry, from Dick Van Dyke?
You already forgot.
I'm proving my own point. Hey, you know that kid that played Richie Petrie? He died. And you're like, huh, go figure. Like, that's the reaction to that.
Larry Matthews. Okay? Jesus.
Okay, well, there you go. That's the confusion. Matthews and Mathers, I just feel like, nobody cares. God bless you. Is he still alive, though? You see how much I care now? Now I care.
Now that would be a conspiracy
Wait a
theory.
minute. I'm actually asking a legitimate question. Is Jerry Mathers still alive? I think he is.
I think Jerry Mathers is.
But is Larry Matthews still alive?
God damn it. Would you just...
See, you don't know because you don't care. That's my point. This is a bad conspiracy. You never should have dragged Richie Petrie in it, conspiracy people, because nobody cares. The guy's a great guy. I'm sure he's a wonderful human. I just meant nobody cares about that character.
Okay, Mr. Larry Matthews hater. Give me one that somebody
Matthews,
cares
Larry
about.
Matthews. Okay, see, I already forgot his name again. Chris, I cannot get his name in my brain. It's already gone again. Who was it? Jerry who?
Okay.
All right, let's continue.
All right. Nobody cares. Nobody cares that Larry Matthews died in some rice paddy over in Da Nang. You tell me about it. Give me one that somebody cared about. I'm waiting. There has to be something that you care about more than Larry Matthews.
I mean, I think the list in terms of that celebrity died, it's rampant, right? There's too many to list. I mean, and we still see it to this day, right? You see clickbait all the time today, where can you believe this person died? Can you believe that person died? So, I mean, there's just too many to list, but I think you nailed it. I remember Jerry Mathers being a big one. He died. I can't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, if somebody listening to the podcast wants to jump in and give us some examples of celebrities when we were growing up that had allegedly died, but they really didn't die, go ahead and go to nicepolpod.com and you can click on any one of the episodes and leave a comment, or you can email us at nicepolpod@gmail.com. There you go, Chris. That's my first push for people to participate. Look at me. All right.
Well, I'll throw another one out there because I remember this at the same time, and I think this had a little bit more cultural resonance than Jerry Mathers / Larry Matthews. When Elvis died, and God, I wish I had it. I bought like some sort of one of those really cheap paperbacks you could get at like 7-Eleven that it was like, is Elvis alive? And I swear to God, Jeff, it came with like a cassette that had this alleged sort of voice of like Elvis explaining to someone why he had faked his death. And then all the really cheap ass tabloids at the time ran with it, right? Ran with this, like these, look at Elvis in his casket. That's a wax dummy. And all this sort of stuff, to the point of like, I remember thinking, take away the fact that he was like extremely unhealthy and addicted to drugs and weighed about 300 pounds, and take all that away. Maybe he wanted to go live another life. And they even had a name for him that was John Burroughs, which was the name he was living under. And I remember, again, I got this paperback with like the cassette with this really crappy crappy audio, that was purportedly Elvis's voice. And I wanted to believe it. I wanted to think, because wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if he just kind of came out one day and said, hey, I'm alive and I weigh 175 pounds and I'm making records again, and again, didn't have the internet, didn't have chat rooms, didn't have anything that where that could sort of bubble up out of nowhere and have people believe it. But man, it was right there, and Elvis was dead. Or was he?
It's the perfect conspiracy if you are the originator of the conspiracy. If you are the guy that created the blueprint for it, it has everything that you need, right? You have someone who just mentioned their name and I automatically know who you're talking about. Check.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that there is some emotion or some sort of a feeling associated with that person. Check. Now, say something that, although crazy, is something that you want to believe, that your brain can connect the dots, because it does sound plausible, or at least enough for you to suspend disbelief long enough to check out the quote-unquote facts a little bit more, right? And of course, that's the greatest one ever, right? Because so many people wanted to believe that he's still alive, because he had reached cult status, as seen today, where people still make their yearly or monthly or daily pilgrimage, to the Elvis Presley estate, which apparently has some sort of a name that I can't remember.
Yeah, it escapes me. That would be Graceland.
Oh, there you go. I keep somehow mixing that up with the Neverland Ranch. I know those are two different things, right, Chris? That's not the same thing? Okay.
It's another conspiracy theory. It's another dead legend.
Oh, that's different. Okay. I don't want to get into it too much because we could have 17 episodes on it, but obviously Michael Jackson is another person that had Oh my God. I mean, there must be 100 different conspiracy theories and urban legends that rose up surrounding Michael Jackson. Many of them super believable just by the fact that his actions were very strange. But
Right.
can you think of anybody else that either died or there was a big urban legend about them? And by the way, Chris, I love looking back on that because you could have just gone right by that magazine at 7-Eleven and not cared. You might have just read the headline and gone, huh, but Chris, it came with the cassette tape,
Oh, God, yeah.
which implies there's proof. There's irrefutable proof. Guys, back then, a cassette tape, that's it. We all knew that the Watergate thing happened because there was a recording. A recording back then, in our minds, was absolute cement proof that something was real. Oh my God. Well, I know what you're thinking. You said to your friends, Chris, it sounds far-fetched, but I have the tape and I am holding it in my hand right now. Case closed.
Well, first of all, I think one thing I did wanted to say is what's interesting about these theories. Are they theories? I guess they're theories.
Well, that's the question, right? I have some theories as to whether or not they're theories.
And even going back to Paul McCartney, you're talking about people who, if they wanted to do this, could do it, right? They had the ways and the resources to like, I'm just going to disappear.
Sure.
I've got millions of dollars in the bank. I'm going to go live somewhere. I'm going to establish. They could, in theory, do it. Okay. And I think that's the thing that sort of plants the seed. Well, and maybe they wouldn't. And at the same time, they not only had the resources, they had the motive. It's just like, you know what, this is all bullshit. I just got to get out of here, And so they had the motive and the resources, and boom, they're gone.
Yeah, connect the dots, Chris. I mean, that's the plausibility that allows people to suspend disbelief. Yeah.
Sure. And then I think that the interesting one, maybe it was the first one that kind of came out, or it came out, but I think probably, and it revolved around Jim Morrison, right? Who died before Elvis, who died way before Michael Jackson. I want to say 1970 or something around that, 70, 71. Jim Morrison died under he was in France and he was with this weird girlfriend who was like some sort of witch. And, the story is that he just died. He was that magic age where I guess a lot of famous people have died at the age of 27. Jim Morrison was 27 years old, of course, had been abusing his body for 27 years and died in a bathtub. We were told he found dead in a bathtub. His heart gave out or a drug overdose or whatever. But the thing about that is that he was like scooped up out of that bathtub and sort of whatever, and just sort of taken care of and put in a coffin and buried and in like a couple of days. So what the hell happened, right? And I think it's even in the film The Doors by a noted conspiracy lover in Oliver Stone.
Yeah.
It's even left a sort of because there's all this mystical stuff. People like Ray Manzarek even like raise questions like what happened. Then the coffin that the legends like Jim was told that it's too small and all this sort of stuff. Like there's no autopsy. It's all just like one dude signing a couple of papers.
Yeah.
And again, a guy who probably said who was essentially very talented but pretty strange, just could have said, you know what, I'm out of here. And now he had to live in the south of France and under a different name. And again, that just kind of the seed that to this day, I think people would probably think, oh yeah, I buy that. Or even, or he'd be the same thing, maybe the 80s now, probably the same age as Paul McCartney, something like that.
Yeah, and you can see all the earmarks of why that would be a popular conspiracy. Again, like we said, you don't want him to be dead if you're a fan. So anything and everything that seems to support that theory, any jigsaw puzzle piece that you can cram into that mosaic of quote-unquote logic, you're going to do it, right? I like the one that combined two things, right? I remember there being a little mini documentary, or maybe it was a news feature on 2020 or something. I can't remember. But it was a guy who was convinced he had found Amelia Earhart, and she lived somewhere in the Midwest or somewhere. And you could tell about halfway through this little expose, this poor woman she's not Amelia Earhart. It's so far-fetched, but this dude had put all the pieces together. If you were to go to his house, the amount of red yarn and stick pins that he used on his giant, board of connecting the dots must have been vast. Like you could have knitted a quilt with the connections that guy had figured out. And this poor woman, just please, sir, I beg you, can you just leave me alone? But oh no, there's no stopping this guy, you know. And to what end? Okay, so you're Amelia Earhart. I mean, even if she was, it's like, and then what? That guy would probably commit suicide if he found out that he was right. There would be nothing left to live for. What are you going to do? Go find Santa Claus? Like, what's the next step after that?
It's a big story for about a week, and then like, okay,
Yeah.
we found Amelia Earhart. It's like she's gone now.
Oh, she didn't die. Okay. Huh.
And yeah, it's like on to the next.
So Amelia, what is the real story? Well, I landed my plane safely. I was able to refuel with some people out there, and I got out of there, thank God, before the Japanese got to me. And then I made it back to the mainland and wanted to just chill out and live a normal life. Huh. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun.
You think about the story behind that. It's like she had just done something that like no woman had ever done, right? And it was like,
What, couldn't follow directions and ended up crashing her vehicle?
oh, good God. Good God.
Guys, I was channeling the misogyny of the 70s and 80s. You know that we are against that. But on this show, sometimes we have to bring it up just because it does exist. All right.
So you're right. So think about it, though. She had just attempted to do something, okay, is that all right, that had never been done. She was iconic in that she was making history or attempting to make history. So this guy's whole premise is that she did it and then thought, you know what? I think I just want to go be a housewife somewhere. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to tell any of my story. I don't want to write a book, have a movie. I don't want to become this, I don't want to try the next big thing after that. It's ridiculous when you think about it, because it's just like, unless his whole thing was something so terrible happened to her.
Wanted to be a housewife somewhere. Okay, Chris,
Yeah.
Defend yourself. Why would she want to be a housewife somewhere? Speaking of misogyny, thank you.
Exactly. I flew around the world, the first woman to ever do it. But,
Yeah.
you know what? I think I'm going to go make some cookies. That was his whole, hypothesis.
Oh, good point. Oh, sorry. I get what you're saying now. Yeah, he just assumes that now she's going to just become Susie Homemaker because in his mind, that's what a woman would do, right? Hey, yeah, like you said, I just set records left and right. I'm one of the most famous, certainly females in aviation history at that point. But now I just want to be subservient to some guy and just whatever it is and sit in the kitchen, like you said, and make hamburger helper. And it's like, oh, okay, that's your theory? Got it. All right.
Right. So, I mean, but again, that's one of those ones, and I think I heard it, right? And there were probably books on it. And obviously you had this one guy who devoted his life to ruining this woman's life, basically, by, to where she had, and it's funny that when you mention that, I immediately flash back to some sort of clip of this woman having to hold like a press conference saying, I'm not Amelia Earhart. I've never been Amelia Earhart. Now back the F up and leave me alone. I mean, she was driven to do that. Imagine that you had to basically, take those steps. It all kind of goes back to, somebody said they never found her body, so she could still be alive, right? So they take that one little grain, just like all these things that we had heard of, these other urban, and remember we made a joke about a long time ago about the poodle and the microwave story, right? Somebody tried to dry off their poodle and their poodle blew up.
I mean, that can happen, Chris. Let's not be quite so, I have heard that poodles are extra vulnerable when it comes to exploding during bathing routines.
Right. So, I think a lot of these are certain grains of truth that turn into, and like I said, we didn't have the internet. It gets turned into a story. Well, this guy told my cousin's next door neighbor's best friend, that X happened, and before you know it, it snowballs into. Yeah. But I can remember things that you've heard about that didn't touch on these sort of celebrities, right? That were just, oh no, it happened, right? It was like it happened to a guy I know, or it happened to a friend of a friend.
Yeah.
When we were kids, if there was a news story, what were we going to do, right? If it had happened, how would we find that? We'd go to the library and dig around on the microfiche, right? And sort of like try to see if we could find this, this newspaper article from 1971 that was about Bigfoot or some mystery. It's like that was the only resource we had. weren't going to do that. You know what I mean? But it's like we had to go based on what people told us or what we heard.
Yeah, what you heard, exactly. And there's other versions of this too, right? It's not so much, I heard they died, but they're really alive. I heard they didn't die, even though they're dead. But we have other ones too, right? One that comes to mind is a few celebrities have fallen into nothing that they did wrong or did differently or nothing at all, other than just being the random victim of someone's active imagination. We questioned their gender, right? Or their sexual orientation or whatever. There was, oh, this celebrity is a hermaphrodite and secretly has, both genitalia. Or this one, isn't really a guy, it's a girl. It's not really a girl, it's a guy. We even see that today, right? Where you're accusing public figures of having a different gender. That's one of my favorites because it's just so completely out there. But again, it's based on, if I say that, can you now visualize it? And if you can kind of visualize that what I'm saying is true, then it has a life of its own and it just picks up on the internet. Or how about this one? A surprise, such as, hey, Mr. Rogers? What do you think of, Chris, when you think of Mr. Rogers? Very soft-spoken, empathetic.
Excellent description.
I guess by today's standards, he would be the king of woke, right? Just absolutely cares, believe it or not, about other humans, isn't a sociopath, actually wants people to feel better and do better and wants to hold them up. But, Chris, do you want to hear what happened? Can you believe this? Mr. Rogers was actually a Navy SEAL back in the day. And do you know what? Chris, do you know those sweaters that he always wears? Have you ever seen him where he's not wearing a sweater?
I love that.
That's to cover up the tattoos that are all up and down his arms from Special Forces and Delta Squad.
I love that. He was a badass, trained killer.
Right? So this guy that you think is very soft is a total badass. Yeah, exactly. Now that's a great conspiracy, right? Because you're like, wait a minute. The sleeves. It's all about the sleeves, man.
Looking for clues.
And then you suddenly have a guy fast forwarding through every single episode, looking for one where he wore short sleeves, or you could actually see his arms.
Or where he's swimming with a knife in his mouth, like that sort of like the bayonet.
Right. Or what happened to him turned him crazy, and that's why he now plays with puppets, right? Because he went crazy. Obviously, that's PTSD. The puppets represent the different, factions. Like, the crazy madam, whatever her name is, the weird old lady puppet, that's actually the Viet Cong, Chris, is what that is. That's a symbol.
It makes
sense. And then the train is actually the Da Nang River, right? It's going down. Chris, listen to me. Hear me out, man. Now all the puzzle pieces are falling into place. I think there was one about Captain Kangaroo. Chris, did you hear that one?
Captain Kangaroo, Lee Marvin, they were in the same platoon, and I think Captain Kangaroo saved Lee Marvin's life.
That tracks.
And I think, yes, again, Captain freaking Kangaroo, the guy that you would trust your life with, and guy like Captain Kangaroo, but no, he was a badass. I think the only thread of truth between that is, they were both in the war. I don't think they knew each other. I don't think they were in the same platoon. Definitely nobody saved anybody's life, but it was a great freaking story. And I think that's the thing. It's like the stories are so good. Like I said, it was like the stories draw you in. The stories are so good, you want to believe them.
Yeah.
You want them to be true. I remember, again, saying, oh man, if Elvis had held a press conference saying, hey, I'm alive, like I said, I'd have been like, this is so cool. He did it. He actually did it. He didn't die on a toilet. He didn't, he wasn't this caricature of himself. He got all his shit together.
So to speak, pardon the pun.
Oh, I know. Wow. But got everything he needed to do and then came back triumphantly.
Yeah.
And did not leave the building.
But here's how that story would go. Later on, 2 years later, we find out that Elvis Presley really didn't die, right? But then he only really delayed death for an extra 3 months, right? Because he was still over 300 pounds and in horrible shape. So I love the idea of him coming back and giving a press conference 2 years after his alleged death and saying, I'm still alive. And then literally 3 weeks later dying of all the same things that he allegedly already died of. So it's like, oh man, oh, right? There's no way that guy was going to live much longer, even if he didn't die, right? I mean, let's be honest. How about the ones, Chris, that you've got ones that are plausible, like Ken Osmond, who, as we just mentioned, played Eddie Haskell on Leave It to Beaver. We do all know that later on he did become a police officer.
Yeah, LAPD. Yeah.
And there was as you can imagine, a fake death rumor of he died in the line of action. What am I trying to say?
Line of duty.
He died in the line of duty was the big conspiracy, right? Oh, that's so cool. Eddie Haskell, and then he became a cop, and then he died. We can all easily believe that one. That one for sure is like super, super believable.
There was also at the same time, and this was another rumor about, I don't know why Leave It to Beaver, because you never heard anything about Barbara Billingsley, other than the fact that great cameo in Airplane. There was also a rumor that Ken Osmond was in fact, and I don't know if you had heard this one, he was not on the LAPD, which turned out to be the actual story, that he was actually was still in show business and has changed his name to John Holmes. And he was John Holmes of
gotcha.
pornography fame.
Oh, okay.
And so
all right.
That was I'll say pretty good, but that was a common, and again, who knows where it came from?
Well, Chris, let's just put 2 and 2 together. On the show, he played a dick. So later on, it's no surprise when someone said, oh, he wasn't just a dick. He was a big dick. Oh, he was the biggest dick. And then someone else misunderstood on this game of telephone and said, he has the ...
You've got it.
And it's John Holmes. That's how you connect the dots, my friend.
You just did it.
I like how everything in the show is now turning into a dick joke. Yeah, and that's probably my fault.
Are these urban legends? Are they rumors? Now they're internet rumors. I think they're all kind of one and the same. But yeah. I do want to ask about one that to this day was so genius and so brilliant. There was a story. No, it happened. Really, Jeff, it happened to my cousin's next door neighbor's uncle's best friend from work's daughter.
Okay, so far you have my attention. Sounds pretty solid.
She was babysitting, and the phone kept ringing, and it was just a voice saying, have you checked the children? And she's just like, what? And she'd hang up the phone.
Oh, my gosh.
And then the phone would ring a few minutes later, and it's the same voice going, hello, because she's babysitting a couple of kids. They're asleep. Yeah. Have you checked the children? Keeps happening.
Whoa.
Have you checked the children? Now, I'm not quite sure if she actually checks the children. Maybe she's too afraid to go upstairs. Maybe she does. She checks the children.
Which is really the only thing you're ever supposed to do as a babysitter, so I'm glad to hear that part. Okay, good.
Finally, somehow, she contacts the police and says, I keep getting this phone call. They keep asking about I checked the children, and kind of freaked out here. The police, because they got nothing better to do and they have all this really cool technology, even in the 70s, call her back a few minutes later and tell her that the call is coming from inside the house.
What?
So there's another line. So she freaks out. She runs out. She gets the police show, whatever. That's the whole story. But the babysitter getting tormented. Now, first of all, not many people had 2 lines in those days, right? Nobody really worked from home.
No, we went over that in a previous episode. That was a rare thing. Yeah.
Right. Now, it'd be pretty easy to be calling somebody from inside the house because you brought your own phone into the house, right?
Chris, we live in an era where my wife will call me from 30 feet away.
I get text messages from downstairs.
And it does not matter how many times I say, why can't you just go, hey, Jeff? No. Bring. Hey, how's it going? Hi, yeah, I'm over here in the kitchen. Oh, cool. I'm 17 feet away from you. What can I help you with?
It's a pretty big kitchen.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to do was raise my voice for 2 seconds. Can you do me a favor? Sure.
Yes. We've all gotten text messages from, downstairs. I've gotten emails. I've gotten, Instagram messages. Or
we don't live in a world, Chris, where we care about the call coming in from inside the house. We don't live in that world anymore. But of course, Chris, that was a movie, right? If I'm not mistaken, obviously.
Right. It became a movie because, again, everything was so brilliant and it was so scary and it was so tense. And then, but here's the worst part I have to tell you. Literally around that same time, when that whole legend kind of came out, the first time I was staying alone at the house at night, okay, and everybody else was gone. My parents were gone. My brothers and sisters were gone, and I was alone. Me and the dogs, and I want to say I was about 10, maybe 11 years old, and I'm probably trying to watch something I shouldn't be watching on cable TV, or I'm trying to get through those squiggly lines and see some nudity or something. And the phone rings.
Word.
And the phone rings, and I drop the phone. And I'm so startled by the phone ringing. And I pick it up, and I'm like, hello? And there's nothing there. Hello? And nobody there. So I hang up the phone. 30 seconds later, the phone rings again. I pick it up. Hello? Hello? Nobody on the other line. But I could hear, how you remember you could hear that there was sort of like a little vacuumy kind of sound, like there's somebody there. I know you're there. Hello? I hang up the phone. It keeps happening. The phone keeps ringing. I'm like, hello? I'm getting more and more tense. I'm thinking, oh my God, somebody's calling me from upstairs from a second line we don't have. You can't check the children because I am the children, right? The phone keeps ringing. Finally, about that I swear to God, Jeff, the 6th or 7th time, I'm like, who is this? I'm calling the police, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do. At that point, I run into the other room, and the phone rings again. And I pick it up, and it's my mom, and they're calling to see how I'm doing. We keep calling. I'm like, what? It's like, why are you not, it's like, why do you keep hanging up? I'm like, I can't hear you. Go back to, it turns out the first time, now if you go back to when they called, I dropped the phone. 70s phone, I did something to the phone when I dropped it. I couldn't hear what was coming through the other side. What I thought was some murderer calling me to taunt me was my mom continually calling me to see how I was doing. But I thought, because I couldn't hear her, because I had broken the phone when I dropped it, that I was going to be murdered.
Well, it's an easy mistake to make, Chris. I mean, obviously, if the phone rings and there's no one there, the only logical next step would be someone is going to murder you. There's really no other dots you can connect. That has to be the only explanation for a phone that continually rings and you can't hear who's on the other line. I think that's perfectly rational. I think you used critical reasoning, and I think that was...
panicking reasoning.
Yeah, that was a sound conclusion to come to, pardon the pun. So, right on. Now, had you actually had a party with your friends and your mom and dad came home, they would have murdered you, right?
Well,
so, yeah.
Or maybe I was murdered and I was replaced, and and there are all these clues about me being dead over all of these decades, and I was replaced by somebody who looked just like me.
Dun, dun, dun. And that's when Chris puts down the bong and says, you know what? I probably should just go to sleep. That's when that happens.
Hey, that's another episode.
Chris, we live in California. It's perfectly okay to admit that in the past you may or may not have partaken in a substance that involved THC. It's okay.
I got into a law that I broke last episode, okay? I need to hear something from you if I'm going to start, admitting to all these past...
Allegedly broke, Chris. Allegedly. This is a podcast, and it's meant for entertainment purposes only. That is alleged. I don't know if they were selling not birth certificates.
Baptismal certificates.
I don't know if they were selling baptismal certificates that would allow people that are underage to go to the DMV and somehow get a California ID that alleges that you're 21 years old, McLovin. I don't know.
I am McLovin.
Now, Chris, we got off again, as always, on some awesome rabbit holes. The logic behind conspiracies, the conspiracies that we heard, the rumors, the legends, all that stuff back in the 70s and 80s. I did want to end this episode by returning to something we had talked about a while ago. This is all the way back to October, okay? So here's a callback. This is a nice poll rewind. We were talking about costumes, Halloween costumes back in the day that were so, fun back then, but by today's standards, really shitty. And of course, we're talking about the famous costumes that would come in a box, and you would see the mask, a big box, and you would see the mask through the little cellophane window.
Yeah.
And the mask was the half mask, and it had a little slit for the eyes and the tongue. And yes, we already talked about the fact that if you stuck your tongue through it, you were going to slice your tongue open pretty severely and have a cut tongue for the rest of the evening. But Chris, I had said back then, I hated the fact that they always put a picture on your chest on that little jumpsuit that you would buy that ruined the costume. So if you dressed up like Darth Vader, on your chest, instead of having a control panel, Darth Vader's breathing apparatus, it had a giant picture of Darth Vader's head. Do you see in Star Wars Darth Vader walking around with his 8x10 headshot on his chest? No, that's the shittiest costume ever. Why am I bringing this up, you guys? Because Chris turned me on to a documentary that I watched on one of the streaming channels. And Chris, what is the name of the documentary? I forgot the name.
Dressing Up Halloween, the story of Ben Cooper Incorporated.
There you go.
Now.
And
hey, free plug, available on Prime, on Amazon Prime. We get no compensation for mentioning this documentary, and I had no idea that there was essentially the father of the supermarket Halloween costume, Ben Cooper, and it gets into some of the things we brought up, and yeah, Jeff, give us your quick 45-second review or thoughts on dressing up Halloween.
So I did watch it, and it is a lot, Chris. I think this thing goes for like an hour and a half. I mean, there's a lot of information. So you guys, if you want to know about every single costume, starting back in like the 50s all the way up to the 2000s, go for it. I checked out right around Transformers or maybe Strawberry Shortcake. But one thing that I learned, and the reason that I'm bringing this up as they go through the history of those costumes, there was a reason, Chris, why they stuck a picture on the chest of the thing, right? So if you were Fonzie, why would I have a picture of Fonzie's face on my chest? That's not a good costume. Here's why. Ready? What did you do, Chris, about 15 minutes into your Halloween costume adventure? Keep in mind, you've got that piece of plastic on your face. It's sweaty. You can barely breathe. What would every kid do after about 10 or 15 minutes of walking around their neighborhood on Halloween?
You basically slide it up like a visor, almost like on a helmet. You would slide it so you'd rest it on the top of your head, and the rubber band would still be like digging into your skin, but you would immediately your breathing rates would return to normal. The sweat would sort of start to dissipate, and you were still in costume, but not fully in costume because, goddamn it, you had to breathe and you had to stop melting.
Right. So as we know, 20 minutes into Halloween, nobody was wearing those masks anymore. They were on top of their head like a hat, and then you would only put it down when it was time to get the candy, right? Oh, another door, put down the mask, get the candy, lift up the mask, go to the next door.
And that was dedication. Yeah.
And so the idea behind this was, since most kids aren't going to wear the mask, we still want the person that opens up the door to immediately know what this costume is. And that's why you've got a picture of Darth Vader's helmet on the jumpsuit so that the dum-dum that opens the door can say, oh, Darth Vader, right? So go figure. Look, I'm not saying it was a good decision. I still hate the decision, but at least now, Chris, the amount of satisfaction and almost like weird relief that I got knowing that, I can't even tell you. It solved, speaking of conspiracies, it solved a puzzle, a riddle that has been plaguing my subconscious for decades. Now I know. And on that, Chris, what do you think? Until next time?
Oh, wait, Jeff, before we go. Now, if I do my math correctly, this is episode 49, correct?
49, it is, yep.
We have some changes in store lined up for episode 50 and beyond. Do you want to discuss? Do you want to give a little tease, a little hint, a little taste?
Oh, yeah. So, hey, podcast audience, first of all, thank you so much to all of you who have been plugging along with us. for the last, what was it, Chris? I think this has been a little over a year now.
Yeah.
It started out as an experiment, and by God, you guys have stuck with us, and the audience is growing, and we just couldn't be happier to take you guys along for the ride. But we also decided that it was time to, in the year 2025, keep up with modern technology. And apparently, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, they now have the ability to show you on a podcast, Chris, video, not just audio, but video, moving pictures. Have you heard of this?
I have, like talkies. Amazing.
Exactly. From now on, you guys, whether you want to or not, are going to be able to actually see Chris and I. Now, for some of you, you may not even know what we look like. Maybe you never looked at that little weird thumbnail that we sometimes put on the website there. But now you're going to see our mugs every single episode. We're going to have all kinds of cool little surprises with this new format. And I think you guys are going to hopefully love it. We've also introduced, get this, Chris, AI.
How do you spell that?
We're going to be using artificial intelligence to score Chris and I every single episode to see who had the nicest poll and how much that added up to. So, Chris, we're going to start getting into some heavy competitions. We're going to start doing audience participation. And by God, here comes the video era. Looking forward to the next episode so much. What do you think, Chris? Until next time?
Till next time, Jeff.